Is the word. Let's get into it. So, if you've watched my channel before, you know I've made a couple videos before about analyzing Gen Z as a generation, analyzing differences between the generations and what that amounts to and what that signifies and represents in the grand scheme of things, especially when we're analyzing the current state of our current society, nationally and globally, modern society as a whole. And obviously, Gen Z is a very interesting generation, a very complex, divisive, and hard generation to pinpoint in a lot of regards. But I think you can say that about most generations in general when they are coming up and becoming the custodians of society. And with that being the case, I want to analyze Gen Z again with an article here written in Pew Research entitled Generation Z Looks a Lot Like Millennials on Key Social and Political Issues. It's written by Ruth Gilnick, Nikki Graff, and Kim Parker. Now, Pew Research is probably one of the best sites, if not the best site, to find aggregate and non-aggregate data and research on a milieu of topics, mostly pertaining to politics and economics. I really would recommend it if you are looking for solid, well-sourced, well-researched, objective, and empirical data on whatever you need to find information on in regards to politics, economics, and a whole bunch of other important and timely metrics, let's just say. So I'm going to analyze this article, read through it, break down specific chunks and excerpts and sections that I think are important to review, and then give you my overall summary and thoughts and conclusions about them. Okay? Let's get to it. Let's start reading this article. Let's go.
1 in 10 eligible voters in the 2020 electorate will be part of a new generation of Americans, Generation Z. Voila! Born after 1996, most members of this generation are not yet old enough to vote, but as the oldest among them turned 23 this year, roughly 24 million will have the opportunity to cast a ballot in November. Obviously, the election has already passed and a new president has been ushered in. And their political clout will continue to grow steadily in the coming years as more and more of them reach voting age. Unlike the millennials who came of age during the Great Recession, this new generation was in line to inherit a strong economy and with record low unemployment. That has all changed now, obviously, as COVID-19 has reshaped the country's social, political, and economic landscape. Instead of looking ahead to the world of opportunities, Gen Z now peers into an uncertain future. True. Obviously. There are already signs that the oldest Gen Zers have been particularly hard hit in the early weeks and months of the coronavirus crisis. In a March 2020 Pew Research Center survey, half of the oldest Gen Zers, age 18 to 23, which I am a part of on the older side, you can guess my age based upon that 5-year range, reported that they or someone in their household had lost a job or had taken a couldn't pay because of the outbreak. This was significantly higher than the share of millennials, 40%, Gen Xers, 36%, and baby boomers, 25%, who said the same. In addition, an analysis of jobs data showed that the young workers were particularly vulnerable to job loss before the coronavirus outbreak, as they are overrepresented in high-risk service sector industries. Aside from the unique set of circumstances in which Gen Z is approaching adulthood, what do we know about this new generation? Well, there's a lot to say, so let's get to it. We know it's different from previous generations in some important ways, but similar in many ways to the millennial generation that came before it. Members of Gen Z are more racially and ethnically diverse than any previous generation, and they are on track to be the most well-educated generation yet. I will post data that confirms that and graphs that prove that. Yeah, they are also digital natives who have little or no memory of the world as it existed before smartphones. Now, I have to push back against that a little bit because, look, I'm born in around 9/11. Let's just say that. I was born around 9/11, and, look, I have massive ADHD, and I've always had a problem with curbing my technology usage, but I remember life in the 2000s before the iPhone. I remember, playing with toys and wrestling with my pillow and playing outside and being with friends and reading books and doing things that are detached from the digital space, the digital realm. So I think a lot of us older Gen Zers born particularly after, let's say, 2003, 2004, we remember life without smartphones and laptops and desktops and just technology absorbing us all over and just being totally immersed in it. We remember having lives that were based upon posting for Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever other app you can think of. So I just wanted to say that. Let's continue. Still, when it comes to their views on key social and policy issues, they look very much like millennials. Well, yeah, because we're basically millennials' younger brother, and we're fucking up in a lot of the same ways, doing a lot of the same stupid shit. So, yeah. Pew Research Center surveys conducted in the fall of 2018, more than a year before the coronavirus outbreak, among Americans aged 13 and older found that, similar to millennials, Gen Zs are progressive and pro-government, most seeing the country's growing racial and ethnic diversity as a good thing, and they're less likely than older generations to see the United States as superior to other nations. And if you go through the public education system nowadays, they do kind of implicitly or explicitly indoctrinate kids with this belief that America is not superior to other nations in the world. I'm very critical of Americanism and the American empire, and the fact that America for way too long, literally the last century, has been engaging in it's been the world's policeman. It's just been toppling leaders, installing governments, manipulating elections in foreign countries all over, installing all these military bases. It's like literally, just spider web of military bases around the world that they use to, reinforce the value of the dollar and maintain global hegemony. And I don't agree with that, but I think it's very manipulative and deceptive and quite harmful to just all out shame America and bash it for its faults and its shortcomings and believe that it's nothing good that America stands for or has perpetuated or has done for humanity and the world. Honestly, I think it's a little too harsh, but yeah, that's true. Yeah, we definitely don't see the United States as superior to other nations, and I think other nations are sick and tired of America being so proudful and being so full of hubris and thinking that it's above everyone else, like it's just a god, which is, it is what it is. You can say what you want about it. So, a look at how Gen Z voters view the Trump presidency provides further insight into their political beliefs. A Pew Research Center survey conducted in January of this year found that a quarter of registered voters aged 18 to 23 approved of how Donald Trump is handling his job as president, while about 3/4 disapproved, 77%. Millennial voters were only slightly more likely to approve of Trump, 32%, while 42% of Gen X voters, 48% of baby boomers, and 57% of those in the silent generation, which means I think the generation that fought in World War II, approved of the job he's doing as president. And I want to add to this that I think there's a gender breakdown in this data as well, because men in general, regardless of age, tend to vote more conservative, and women generally tend to be more liberal, tend to have more socialist leanings, beliefs, yada yada. I'm not being sexist, it's just literally true. Women do tend to vote for the left more than men do, and of course they are a larger portion of the electorate in the country nowadays. So I think if we broke that down, we would show that a lot of the support for liberal politicians, Democrats, and leftist politics are coming from the ladies. Lovely ladies. Anyways, Gen Z is more racially and ethnically diverse than previous generations. Gen Z represents the leading edge of the country's changing racial and ethnic makeup. A bare majority, 52%, are non-Hispanic white, significantly smaller than sheriffs. Millennials, who were non-Hispanic white in 2002, 61%. 1 in 4 Gen Zers are Hispanic, 14% are black, 6% are Asian, and 5% are some other race or two more races. Yeah, so this article is very dense and layered and loaded with facts and anecdotes and statistical embellishments, but I do want to highlight a couple of good observations that it makes, so I will read through some of these excerpts. So for one here, for example, younger generations see family societal change as a good thing. Across a number of measures, Gen Zers and Millennials stand out from older generations in their view of family and societal change, which I think is obvious. Roughly half of Gen Zers, 48%, and Millennials, 47%, say gay and lesbian couples being allowed to marry is a good thing for our society. And I generally do as well, but I have my criticisms of that, whatever. By comparison, only 1/3 of Gen Xers and about 1/4 of Boomers say this is a good thing. Pluralities of Boomers and Gen Xers say it doesn't make a difference. Members of the silent generation are more likely to view this as a bad thing for society. There's a similar pattern in views of people of different races marrying each other, with larger shares of Millennials and Gen Zers saying this is a good thing for our society compared to old generations. Peer review across generations say this is a bad thing for society. Gen Zers and Millennials are less likely than older generations to say that single women raising children, single mothers, are on their own is a bad thing for society. Still, relatively few in both generations say this is a good thing for society, while about half say it doesn't make much difference, roughly similar to the share among older generations. And I know for a fact that Red Pill content creators are going to have a lot to say about that. But they do have a lot to say about that. If you've been in the Red Pill space, the manosphere, you know what the content creators and the figures think about single women raising children on their own and whether it's good or bad for society. I won't make a face judgment on that. I'll let the manosphere and the Red Pill space speak for me. Yeah, yikes. Anyways, when it comes to their own home life, the experience of Gen Z reflects in parts broad trends that have reshaped the American family in recent decades. According to data from Census Bureau data, about 29% live in a household with an unmarried parent, while 66% live with two married parents. A roughly comparable share of millennials, 69%, live with two married parents at a similar age, but the shares among Gen Xers and Boomers were significantly larger, 72% and 86% respectively. Of those Gen Zers who are living with two married parents, in most cases both of these parents are in the labor force, 64%. This compares with a slightly higher share of millennials who were living with two parents at a comparable age. 66% had two parents in the labor force, and a slightly lower share of Gen Xers, 61%. And I assume that's probably because divorce rates skyrocketed in the 70s and 80s, where Gen Xers were coming of age and Boomers were in their 20s and 30s marrying, because those two groups early on had high divorce rates, very high for a time at America. Yeah, we can talk about the pronouns. Oh god, we can talk about the pronouns. Generations differ in their familiarity and comfort with using gender-neutral pronouns. Ideas about gender identity are rapidly changing in the U.S., and Gen Z is at the front end of these changes. Yay to my generation, we're just doing so much good for the world, we're just so progressive. Gen Zers are much more likely than those in older generations to say they personally know someone who prefers to go by gender-neutral pronouns, with 35% saying so, compared with 25% of millennials, 16% of Gen Xers, 12% of Boomers, and just 7% of people of the silent generation. This generational pattern is evident among both Democrats and Republicans, two sides of the same coin. There are also stark generational differences in views of how gender options are presented on official documents. Gen Z is by far the most likely to say that when a form or online profile asks about a person's gender, it should include options other than man and woman. About 6 in 10 Gen Zers, 59%, so just about, say forums or online profiles should include additional gender options, compared with half of millennials. About 4 in 10 Gen Xers and baby boomers, 40% and 37%, respectively, agree with this, and roughly a third of those in the silent generation at 32%. So look, with the whole gender pronoun stuff, look, if you want to identify a certain way, I guess if I really want to be that much of a libertarian and that much of a radical individualist and just say fuck it to rules and norms and any sort of social order, fine. I guess you can just identify whatever you want. But it's going too far now. There aren't 83 genders. Sorry, that's bullshit. I'm sorry. This whole thing with pronouns and identifying in a certain way, it's a sign of a very cancerous mental illness that is plaguing our society, and so many people have gotten hit with the bug. I see it all the time on job applications I filled out, on dating apps I've signed up for, on all these things, websites I've signed up for to get their emailing list. They ask for your gender and they say other. What do you mean by other? What types of gender? What do you mean by other? There's unknown gender that people can identify with, and then there's non-binary and non-traditional, and oh my god, this if there's anything about my generation that's just mind-boggling and stupefying to me, it's the obsession with pronouns and people putting them in their bios, people wearing it like a badge of honor. Go fuck yourself. Let me not even use that language like that. But I just, oh my god, the pronouns, that shit gets on my last fucking nerves. Stop, people of my generation, stop with the pronouns. Stop hounding people and defriending people and stop associating people because they don't respect your pronouns. That shit is whack. It's lame. I'm not going to use the G word that I really want to use or the F word I really want to use because I want to keep this clean, professional, but this shit is stupid. Stop the fucking pronouns, for fucking Christ's sake. God almighty, my generation. Oh my god. Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of other. There's a whole like 4 more paragraphs about gender pronouns. I'm not gonna read through that. So within the GOP, Gen Zers have sharp differences with their elders. This is probably one of the more interesting parts of the article. So it says, among Republicans and those who lean to the Republican Party, which I don't really subscribe to the whole 2-party system. I think it's stupid and it's outdated and we need something better. Anyways, there are striking differences between Generation Z and older generations on social and political issues, obviously. In their views on race, Gen Z Republicans are much more likely than older generations of Republicans to say blacks are treated less fairly than whites in the U.S. today, which is interesting because there are a lot of alternative conservatives or people of the so-called alt-right, you might call them, or just people who stray away and differ ideologically from the mainstream GOP establishment, that they criticize conservatism and call it out for basically being right liberalism or liberalism on running the speed limit, because it seems that a lot of Republicans just do what the Democrats do, but they're always like a year or 2 or a couple months behind what the Democrats do. So they're not really opposition to the Democrats. They're like more like controlled opposition. They just constantly take answers, follow beck and call, and really make their moves and base their strategy off of what Democrats are doing, because their job really isn't to oppose the Democrats, it's just to look like they're opposing the Democrats, because they both Democrats and Republicans have the same donor base and same corporate sponsors that they have to appease and capitulate to at every step in the fucking road. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. So, in reviews on race, I already read that. Fully, 43% of Republican Gen Zers say this, compared with 30% of millennial Republicans and roughly 2 in 10 Gen X, Boomer, and Silent Generation Republicans. Views are much more consistent across generations. Okay, similarly, the youngest Republicans stand on their views on the roles of government and the causes of climate change. Gen Z Republicans are much more likely than older generation Republicans to desire an increased government role in solving problems. About half, 53% of Republican Gen Zers say government should do more, compared with 30% of millennials, 29% of Gen Xers, and even smaller shares among older generation. And the youngest Republicans are less likely than older counterparts to attribute the Earth's warming temperatures to unnatural patterns as opposed to human activity. 18% of Gen Z Republicans say this, compared with 3 out of 10 or more among older generations. That's interesting, which really shows that a lot of Gen Z Republicans are quite no different than Democrats, because the whole reoccurring stereotype or archetype is that conservatives are about small government, so they're really kind of like libertarians but with a different label. So they care about small government, low taxes, government staying out of people's lives, not intruding on people's liberties or people's property rights. See here, Gen Z Republicans are a bit more leaning to the left in terms of climate change, and there's actually, let me go back up, because there's actually a whole section on climate change. Where is it? There is a part about climate change. Okay, there's a graph here. I'll post it. But it says here that these younger generations, Gen Zers and Millennials, are more likely than their older counterparts to say the Earth is getting warmer due to human activity. 54% of Gen Z and 56% of Millennials say this, compared with smaller shares of Gen Xers, Boomers, and Silents. 48%, 45%, and 38% respectively. When it comes to... that's about race relations, which I think we all know how younger people feel. Obviously, it says that younger generations, Gen Z especially, think blacks are treated less fairly than whites. We already know that, yada yada. But the climate change thing is something I really want to address, because this is like a very weirdly pivotal and crucial issue that my generation harps on, is very concerned about. Like, so many people I know, fall into and support and embody and view the whole activist doings and work of, like Greta Thunberg and people like that, because, they're so concerned about the environment. We have to reduce, reuse, recycle. I remember even being bombarded with that sort of propaganda in elementary school, about reduce, reuse, recycle. I've had all my school, I think, have made an effort to be about conscious recycling and have recycling trash bins where you throw your recycled garbage in there. So this has been stuff that's been forwarded and injected into the public's conscious and psyche for a while now. And look, do I think climate change is real? Yes. I am one of those people that's a little skeptical to just quickly say that it is man-made. Obviously, fossil fuels, or a problem. Not a problem. Maybe we're using too many of them, but I think there are a lot of other critical factors that don't get highlighted enough in this discussion. All we talk about is what America and countries in the West should be doing, and how we need to have less children. Explain to me that propaganda. Where did that propaganda come from? That in order to solve climate change and not mess with the ozone layer and cool the earth more and lower global warming, we need to have less babies and decrease our carbon footprint. Where did that come from? You're not telling China and India to do that, and China and India are literally the biggest polluters on the fucking planet, and I will post graphs and stats to prove that. They pollute way more than any Western nation does, and they get no flack for it. They get off the hook every single time. I don't understand that. And there's been these fear-mongering and misleading accusations and speculation about overpopulation, and it's a ticking time bomb. There was even a book, I think, written about this, back in the 80s or something, and when that sort of heightened propaganda was being peddled a lot. So, the whole climate change thing, I think it's cool that young people are being activists and, getting involved and, their voice being heard, like I'm doing with this YouTube channel and this video, but a lot of it seems astroturf to me. The movements and protests and activity I see a lot of young people participating when it comes to addressing climate change seems very manufactured. Very little of it seems authentic. A lot of it seems just driven by their susceptibility to being misled by mainstream media and the news that they watch and listen to on social media, or if they watch TV still, because my generation really doesn't watch TV that much. But it's not authentic, and I think a lot of kids in my generation, due to just the ubiquity of social media and how it affects the way we live our lives and do things, it's really just dug up and resurrected, or just activated like Frankenstein, this sort of just narcissistic impulse that my generation feels the need to act upon via avenues like protesting and lobbying against certain regulations and legislation about climate change to make the world better and make it a safer place where we can all live in. And that's a good thing, but it's a lot of it is astroturfed, and I just think that we need to have a more rational, balanced conversation on whether climate change really is man-made or not. Because I think there's evidence to support that it's could be both. Because if you look at the whole meltdown and literal close to shutdown and breakdown of civilization that occurred in Texas, back in February with their power grid, basically almost literally minutes away from completely collapsing, as I saw some news articles say. You could blame both wind turbines, solar energy, and the usage of fossil fuels in their state central power grid, because their power grid in Texas is separate from the eastern power grid and the western power grid. So both of those sources of energy were blamed for the malfunctioning and the widespread failure to give energy to people that need it, for the power grid being down. But I think there needs to be a more rational debate on climate change that extracts people's feelings out of the equation and gets all this sort of humdrum, saccharine, just bleeding heart, goobly gop that gets caught up in the whole equation. So but there's this interesting part as well where it says how, for example, members of Gen Z are more likely than other older generations to look to government to solve problems, because we a lot of us are socialists and communists. We do believe in big government, and ironically, via proxy, big business. It's weird to me how so many people I know who are on the left support support woke capital and woke corporations espousing SJW talking points. It's the irony and contradiction there is mind-boggling. Anyways, fully 7 in 10 Gen Zers say the government should do more to solve problems, while 29% say government doing too many things. Better leave it to businesses and individuals to solve problems, which is true because most government workers are not employees, they're not business owners, they're not entrepreneurs, they're not capitalists in the true sense of the word, so they don't really know how to allocate resources, build products and services that people need and want, and how to sustain a functioning market economy that produces goods that people need and actually grows maturely and thrives and develops, all like that. Anyways, a somewhat smaller share of millennials, 64%, say government should do more to solve problems. And this view is even less prevalent among older generations. 53% of Gen Xers and 49% of boomers and 9% silent generation. So yeah, that's as much of the article I'm going to read. You guys can read the rest. I will leave the link in the description box. All in all, what are my thoughts and summaries on where my generation stands in the fold of things, in the grand scheme of things, the matrix, the puzzle pieces. Yeah, we're an interesting generation. We're at this sort of weird cultural impasse in place where the trajectory of the world and the nation, America, is just accelerating and barreling towards a lot of uncertainty, a lot of darkness, tough times. I see in the future, and hopefully there'll be some saviors, some innovators, some entrepreneurs, some forward-thinking people, some just strong, capable leaders that emerge out of my generation. I think we're already seeing some of that kind of, but I hope I see more of it in larger quantities and in larger capacities, because that'd be great. So, all in all, my generation's a mixed bag. So, a lot of things are just bad. A lot of things are horrific, horrible about my generation. Atrocious.
There are a lot of behaviors and trends and tics that my generation has or associates with or believes in that are atrocious and unbearable and disgraceful and just embarrassing. But I do think a lot of them will get leveled out. A lot of these idiosyncrasies and tics will get evened out and eased out whenever the next crisis or pandemic comes around and forces a lot of people to level up, become heroes, take charge, take action, and really mature and become something greater and seize the day, as they say. And those that don't will just prove what a lot of people have been saying about Gen Z for the worse. So there's that. I want to go over certain sections of this article that address certain issues that Gen Z has a certain consensus on and a certain majority opinion on. So, what was it? There were a couple of key issues that I wanted to give some additional commentary on. For one, the whole climate change debacle. Now, this has been blown up in the media for a long time now. For decades now, they've been fear-mongering and pushing all this hysteria and concern over climate change and global warming and the planet's going to be overpopulated and the planet's going to become too hot due to fossil fuels and greenhouse gases and all this heat getting trapped in the Earth's atmosphere, and all these sort of theories and postulations and just ideas that have just been thrown out into the ether. There have been books written about, concerns over overpopulation and how the size of the population of the Earth is a ticking time bomb, and we have to take it seriously and do our best to, of course, mitigate this potential disaster and handle it accordingly, which, if you read into the language there, you understand that basically means they want to, lower said population by any means necessary, vaccine or not, food poisoning or not, poisoning the water or not, poisoning the air or not, just literally by any means necessary, good old Malcolm X style. And I think a lot of people in my generation don't take the time to do the deep research, go down those rabbit holes that reveal information from alternative sources that give an alternative, a plausible, in my opinion, more sensible and realistic opinion and conclusion and a viewpoint on why climate change is such an issue nowadays. I think it really has to be brought up and reasserted and reaffirmed how insidious the propaganda and the framing of this whole narrative has been for decades now, but increasingly in recent years. They've shifted the term that we use now from global warming to climate change. Like, think about that. That basically, is normalizing and conditioning people who read about this stuff and see this stuff in the news constantly to quite literally think in their head, oh wait, the climate is changing. The climate is changing, and it's changing for the worse, and it's changing at a radical pace that we're not capable of handling with the resources, with the science infrastructure, and with all that other sort of related stuff that we have in place currently. We've been tracking the data, but we're not on top of the ball as much as we should be. And I think this kind of plays into the elite's hand and plays into the mainstream media's hand and plays into all these actors and organizations and entities' playbook, where it basically gives them plausible deniability and allows them to go forth with what they want to do under the guise of protecting public health and looking out for the environment and taking care of the environment and being so moral and altruistic. But we all know, if we do our research, that they are manipulating the environment, they're manipulating the climate, they're manipulating the weather in very extreme means, using very extreme measures. They're doing this because they are quite literally trying to manufacture these crises and these disasters that are going to displace large amounts of populations worldwide. They're doing this to quite literally engineer a whole new society in this very grand and biblical fashion that is kind of very disturbing when you realize the parallels between the Bible and where we're at currently in modern society. This is where the whole refugee crisis over the last couple of years has come about from. Obviously, that's due to more, people in certain regions, specifically in the Middle East, being displaced due to war and the fallout and the aftermath of that, and their homes literally being leveled to rubble, to ruin, due to the the stampede, the encroaching army that the American regime and American military complex, industrial complex, has waged and levied forward in the name of certain interests and interest groups. But as I've said, they are manufacturing this whole climate change crisis just to engineer a whole new society and to consolidate power even further and increase the sort of public-private cooperation that they've been talking about for a while now, and the World Economic Forum keeps reusing that sort of terminology and phrasing for obvious reasons once you know what their true aims and goals are. And this is sort of deep dive research that not a lot of people engage in and are willing to go forth on the journey of discovering, because a lot of people today are intellectually lazy, particularly in my generation. They're easily brainwashed. They are quite literally walking zombies, and I'm going to make another video addressing that. But all this is to say that with climate change, just do your research on geoengineering. Just do your research on cloud seeding and all these other scientific means and processes that they've concocted and developed in order to, increase the amount of hail, increase the amount of rain, increase flooding, increasing all these sort of natural disasters and the probability that these happen. There was an article I read a while back about how they did this sort of cloud seeding, as I'm talking about, during the Olympic Games in Beijing in 2008. They've been doing this for a long while, and people really need to do their research and look into these things. Bill Gates, man of the hour, who is, recently been out of the media spotlight due to controversy with his very convenient and sudden and abrupt divorce
and controversy that's kind of tarnished his reputation due to his dealings with co-workers and women that have worked for him. But this dude, is buying up a lot of farmland. He's the largest owner of private farmland in the nation, and he recently, it was reported that he was investing in a project that was going to go through a test run in Sweden this summer, apparently, where they were literally going to try and use methods like cloud seeding and otherwise to literally try to block out the sun. There was another article I read where a team of scientists and researchers in America were also gathering data, writing up reports, and coming up with an official statement on why they thought that an activity and a objective in a project like trying to block out the sun would help out with climate change and protecting the environment in the long run. Now, on the surface level of things, these seem like noble aims and noble projects to take on. But when you really look into things, you realize that these people are psychotic, they're maniacs, they're high off their own power. And since the cult of scientism has such a sway and a stranglehold of power nowadays, because people invest in science as this sort of semi-secular religion, these people don't really get questioned, and their motives and their aims and the projects that they take upon and seek to bring into reality are just happen, and they just get all this funding and investing from all these sources and organizations and people high up in the ultra wealthy elite, and it just goes about as so, and nobody really understands the deeper reason behind these things. So I think with the whole climate change narrative, a lot of people are woefully misinformed, including many people in my generation. And so when they engage in this sort of faux righteous activism inspired by people like Greta Thunberg, who are very funded, who are very astroturfed as, influencers and public figures and talking heads and just public figures that the media puts a lot of coverage on, they don't know any better, and they don't realize that they are being lied to and persuaded and manipulated to advocate for things that they don't fully understand. So yeah, there's that, in my whole opinion, with the climate change narrative. Now, with Trump, what can really be said about that? I don't think it's just my generation, but I think it's with everybody. Hit piece after hit piece, smear campaign after smear campaign. Over the last 4 years, we've seen gaslighting and a character assassination of an individual, regardless of his stature, his status, what he's accomplished, what he's done in his life, the associates he's had, and the interactions with certain other individuals and entities and organizations he's had in the past. We have seen gaslighting and manipulation of perception at a scale that's pretty historic. Like, the media has done such an excellent job of quite literally painting Trump as Hitler. And I know full stop that so many people in my generation have bought this narrative hook, line, and sinker, without second question, without doubt, without really any sort of critical thinking put into the idea of whether or not how the media portrays Trump is even accurate. Look, I'm not saying Trump's perfect. I'm very mixed on Trump. I think he's good on some things and horrible and atrocious on others. I don't think he's this demonic individual, this demonic Satan worshiper, this just, racist, xenophobic, misogynistic prick, and overly zealous and selfish and arrogant billionaire that the media portrays him out to be. Now, does he have an ego? Is he pompous? Is he brash? Is he, not the most elegant in terms of his language, his diction, his delivery, and, his composure as a public speaker? Sure, but there are more important things to being a politician than knowing how to say the right things. It seems nowadays, especially, that
all that the only thing that most politicians know how to do right is to say the right things in front of the camera, and be viral, and know how to tickle the ears and the heart, instead of actually getting things done and getting policies and legislation passed that actually improves the lives of the people that voted them in. So on that accord, Trump gets a pass for me because he's done more than the average politician nowadays does. But once again, he is also a globalist plant, and he's definitely in those elite circles and runs miles in those circles and does business with those kinds of people, and they have his back and he has theirs. I'm absolutely convinced of that. So all in all, with Trump, I think a lot of people in my generation have been gaslit to view him as this devil like no other, this antichrist like no other, this just evil, satanic, heartless, soulless monstrosity like none other, like worse than Stalin, worse than Hitler, worse than Mao, worse than Genghis Khan, worse than any evil dictator that's ever existed throughout history that we all know about and is universally known. Really think about how the whole weight and force of the entire media industrial complex shifted against Trump unanimously, unilaterally, once he made his name known and made it be known for all that he was running for president in the office of President of the United States, POTUS, right? This guy was a Hollywood darling. He was in their TV shows. He was a media magnet. He was well beloved by a lot of the people that operate in that industry. He was a very popular, famous guy, very funny, typical, charming, and suave rich guy. Had lots of women adoring him, but as soon as he runs for president, he's evil, blowhard, Trump, he's Hitler, and we need to oppose him before fascism and genocide rears its ugly head again. Think about that. So, just adjust your thinking a little bit, your frame of lenses, and realize that you're being gaslit. So, there's my thoughts on Trump. Now, finally, I will give additional thoughts on my opinion on how Gen Z views gay issues, the LGBT community, and the whole 9 yards with that. Look, I will say personally, and I think I speak for a lot of people, I don't hate anybody who associates with that community. I don't hate anybody who identifies as LGBTQ. I'm not homophobic or queerphobic or transphobic, as these terms like to get used in ad hominems, as epithets, as slurs, to slander people's character, their arguments, and their reputation. I'm not any of those labels, and they don't apply to me. That being said, if you look throughout history, and history proves this, there was clear, concise reasons why sexual deviancy and the amount allowed within the public sphere was extremely limited. Most anthropologists and sociologists, most people who study the rise and fall of civilizations and study human civilization as a process and a function in and of itself, they, like J.D. Unwin, great example, they've all demonstrated that sexual deviancy and the mainstream acceptance and tolerance of said sexual deviancy at a mass scale is one of the clear, undisputable signs that a civilization is in decline. You saw this very clearly in Weimar Republic Germany in the 20s after World War I, where there were clinics arising in Berlin and a lot of these major cities where they were having clinics for transgender people and allowing them to have surgeries like that. Go look up Magnus Hirschfeld. This guy was very one of the more popular figures known for being associated with that kind of stuff. It's just a clear, undisputable sign of civilizational decay when sexual deviancy in any capacity of any kind is widely normalized and accepted. And I'm not saying every aspect of the lifestyle, the norms, the traditions, the habits, the behavior of people associated with that community, the LGBTQ community, is inherently degenerate, but some aspects of it are. I think the bad aspects, the negative aspects and attributes of said community are getting highlighted and blown out, more so in the public sphere, in the media, than the good aspects and positive aspects are. I'm not trying to be hateful, but go look at some of these pride parades. Go look at the debaucherous, degenerate activities that go down during some of these parades. It's very vulgar, it's very crass, and there are kids at these parades at times, and you see grown men with dildos strapped to their half-naked bodies just twerking in front of little children at some of these parades. It's not wholesome, it's not dignified, it's low, it's disgusting, it's downright filthy, and there needs to be limits and barriers put to not allow this stuff to get to the children. And I think I'm understanding more and more what people mean when they say that there's a slippery slope with accepting this kind of stuff. Look, the Supreme Court ruling that made it unconstitutional to ban same-sex marriage, you can have your opinion on that. That's fine. But if you compare the support and approval for other agendas and social issues like racial equality, equality of the genders, equality for women to be able to participate in the workforce and not be housewives at home, there hasn't been that huge of support and approval in comparison for things like the LGBTQ community and all that sort of stuff. The acceptance and normalization of everything gay and everything wrapped in a rainbow flag is very, very recent. Very, very recent. I believe even during Obama's first term as president, there wasn't as much mass acceptance and tolerance for everything being gay as much as there is now. It's literally been this just abrupt and rapid and spiking encroachment and push and normalization over the last 5, 6, 7 years. You're seeing more gay characters in TV shows and movies. You're seeing more advertisements and with LGBTQ themes and rainbow flags. Pride Month gets as much coverage as much as Black History Month does nowadays. And they're really being aggressive and coordinated and centered in pushing the sort of sexual deviancy, this sort of gender bending stuff, any ideas and ideals and agenda associated with the LGBTQ community onto little kids now. They're trying to push for more education that talks about LGBTQ issues and gay acceptance. I'm seeing so many videos and memes and pictures of schools and classrooms across the nation where this stuff is getting taught to kids at a very young age, even younger than when I was taught about all this sort of stuff. I don't even remember being taught about any of this sort of stuff in elementary school and middle school. I wasn't taught about really anything super gay or anything related to the LGBTQ agenda until high school. So this stuff is very, very recent. They are normalizing this stuff in commercials, and they're targeting entertainment that young people, especially kids under the age of 12, 13, who don't have much critical thinking skills or mental faculty to think for themselves when their parents aren't around, to accept this sort of stuff and get it into their heads and inculcate with them and inoculate them with it so that they accept it and they view this as normal, as a new normal. And if you saw that video of that gay choir in San Francisco where they made this sort of meme video that went viral where they basically admit that they're coming for your children, you have to understand where the hysteria over accepting homosexuality has been from the very beginning, and why for most of human history, most civilizations and most societies, especially American society up until 5 years ago, didn't tolerate this stuff. You get why, because there is a slippery slope that exists with normalizing anything related to the LGBTQ community. There is. It goes from we just want to be married, we just want to be able to marry in public and marry who we love regardless of who we love. And it goes quickly from that to you have to bake our cake or you're a bigot. Then it goes from that to you have to have rainbow flags put everywhere on fighter pilot jets, on missiles, on every national and state and local building that's, government property. You have to teach this. Then it goes afterwards to you have to teach this stuff in universities. Then it goes to you have to teach this stuff in high school, then middle school, then elementary school. The slippery slope is real, and it progressively gets worse the more you accept this stuff. There have been so many articles written over the last couple of years basically encouraging the acceptance and normalization of pedophilia and pedophiles, especially framing it and presenting it as just another sexual orientation. And when you think about the elites, a lot of who, they groom children and they rape children and they are pedophilic and they are blood-sucking, adrenochrome drinking vampires, really. You see how all this stuff is arranged and organized and coordinated. It's satanic, it's demonic, it's sinister, it's very diabolical. And once again, I have to say that I don't hate individual gay people, but the mass support from the media and the media apparatus and the media industrial complex, along with these other adjacent institutions like the university system, like Hollywood, like even the deep state and the defense industry and our overall government now, and how they're adopting this sort of rhetoric attached to the LGBT community as part of an overall greater campaign for civil rights. This stuff gets very tricky, and I'm not saying that gay people or youths that are gay or transgender should be bullied or ostracized or made fun of or harassed or bullied for who they are, who they supposedly are in the case of transgenders, but this stuff should not be pushed onto all kids. This stuff should not be pushed onto 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds. There needs to be a limit. There needs to be a stopgap. There needs to be a wall put up saying you cannot go this far. You need to stop where you're at. There needs to be a limit to these sorts of things. There has to be. And if that's and you're seeing the sort of downward trajectory our culture is going on, and that's partially because this sort of stuff is being normalized and accepted at scale. And you look at Gen Z, you look at my generation, 1/6 of people associate and identify as LGBTQ or some aspect of that. And in my opinion, like with a lot of stats, that number is woefully underreporting the actual number. The actual number and percentage of kids who identify as LGBTQ in my generation, I presume that to be way higher. And it's only going to get higher the more we accept this stuff and the more civilization begins to collapse figuratively and literally. And when this sort of stuff gets normalized and accepted at scale, civilization will collapse because people are not going to have children. It's very antinatalist, sadly to say, but you're not encouraging more families by normalizing the gay lifestyle, and it's just going to lead to lower birth rates, and it's going to fulfill the elite's agenda of depopulation. So overall, it's a lose-lose. But once again, I have to back up and conclude this statement by saying that I do not hate individual gay people or individual people who are part of the LGBTQ community. If I had a gay son, I would not ostracize myself from him. I would not alienate myself from him. I would try to understand and work along with him and understand his state of mind and his viewpoint and how he feels about things and who he is as a person. Now, the LGBTQ community is a small percentage of the population. It should be treated like that. It shouldn't be treated like it's 50% of the population, like media and movies and TV shows and all these other sources and outlets are trying to convince people nowadays. It's just not the case. It's just not the case. Okay?